Okay, I think we're ready. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last day of the Congress. How are you feeling in the room today? Yeah? All right, ready to go. So, I think today I would like to just start with maybe a quick reference, right? Have any of you read the book by Rose George, 90% of Everything? Is that familiar? No, 90% of everything? So it's a book about shipping. And the idea is that shipping is responsible for 90% of any goods that are traveling around the world, right? And it's quite a fascinating book to read. It's a bit outdated, but it's still very relevant, and especially today with ships being blocked, you know, and basically trade being blocked because ships are blocked. And the reason I say this is because trade has also basically shaped our understanding of the world. Now, unfortunately, trade has also been linked to, domination, expansion, and conquest. Traditionally, that's how trade would have been managed. But luckily, over the course of, humanity, we've come to the point where trade is actually more based on rules and dependence on supply chains that are functioning, or we hope. And I think this resonates in particular with seed, because obviously with seed it's not just a question of exporting a final product. It's a whole constant movement of seed that is required, and therefore all the international frameworks that can influence the international movement of seed are of particular importance. Some of those international frameworks are very technical and specific, and they deal, for instance, with elements around plant health that impact seed as well. But then we're also seeing other international fora or governance frameworks that are not specifically on seed, but that will also have an influence. So think, for instance, the climate negotiations, think all sorts of multilateral or bilateral trade agreements. All of this will influence, in the end, policies, regulations, and measures that can have an impact on seed as well. And I think this is, broadly speaking, the context within which we are going to be discussing with our panelists here today. I would like to then briefly introduce them. We have on the far side here Enrico Perotti. He is the Secretary of the International Plant Protection Convention, hosted at the FAO. Enrique Sergio Alves is Global Regulatory Strategy Executive Manager at GDM. And Lloyd Day, you are Deputy Director General at the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, and I think we can give them a warm welcome round of applause. So I've discussed in this introduction this idea that technical frameworks on international level that will have an impact on seeds will also interact with other types of frameworks that are not necessarily focus themselves on seed. And maybe I'd like to start with you, Lloyd. I mean, you are representing such an international organization in a specific region. Could you just maybe say how much you feel international negotiations, for instance, around the COP or trade agreements, are influencing the way then governments are operating in your region of the world, in the Americas?
Well, thanks very much, Jean-Paul, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you here. I'm operating on 2 days without sleep, coming from Costa Rica. IICA represents the ministers of agriculture of the Western Hemisphere, so from Canada in the north to Argentina and Chile in the south, including the Caribbean island nations that depend on shipping as well. When you were talking about shipping in your opening statements, I started thinking about last year's Congress and the Bosphorus and how you see ship after ship after ship passing through the Bosphorus. And fortunately, I have a friend there who's a captain of a ship, and he sailed around the world, and now he's just a pilot on the Bosphorus. So went out to lunch, and he could contact and connect with all those different ship captains and pilots who were escorting the ships through the Bosphorus. And it's wonderful to see commerce in motion. And trade has been so instrumental in raising the level of prosperity in the world to levels we've never seen before. And it's somewhat sad from my perspective that it's being attacked so often as a source of evil or colonization or other things that you mentioned, as well as a source of reducing the incomes of individuals when in fact it's raising the tide for everyone. Never in the course of human history have people been so affluent and so healthy and so wealthy, and so I think that's an important context. There's lots of different international organizations that impact trade, and the subject of this theme is from Belém to Lisbon, and Belém is where we had the last COP for climate change, and obviously the climate change discussions are starting to seep into a lot of trade agreements, which should just be focused on trade. But now in the WTO and other places, people are trying to insert environmental conditions into that, and that's something that we in the Americas, our member states, have a lot of concern about, because we, have been trying to reduce tariffs for years. They're coming back up. They're telling me that I'm not being well heard. Hopefully this is better. We don't want additional requirements that are not based on science to impact trade. Trade ought to be, especially in agriculture, ought to be based on sound fundamentals of science, not on ideology. And so we're very concerned, and that's why we're active in the COP and in many other organizations, the WTO, where these kind of ideologies should not have a place. We should focus on the merits that are enshrined in bodies like the IPPC and the OIE, the WOA, and Codex Alimentarius, so that traders and farmers have something that that is stable and predictable and not full of other elements like climate change.
So on the IPPC side, Enrico, do you see an influence from other negotiations in, for instance, trade or in climate talks that are somehow reshaping the way you're also carrying out your work? I'm thinking really on an intergovernmental level more than specifically on a technical level at this point.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the question, Jean-Paul. So first of all, the IPPC, International Plant Protection Convention, is a binding agreement. It's a contract between 185 countries, okay? So this contract makes each country responsible. I call the 185 countries our shareholders, if you wish. And we, as a Secretariat, we there, the IPPC, the International Plant Protection Convention Secretariat, we there to serve our shareholders. So that's the first point. And of course, one no-brainer is prevention is better than cure, okay? So our mission is to protect plant. So we science-based, as you were saying, Lloyd. We science-based, and our mission is to protect plants, but enable trade. And maybe I'll give a quick metaphor. We heard at the beginning of the inauguration, beautiful guitar playing. And a guitar string, when it's free, it can wiggle everywhere, but it doesn't produce any music. It's when it's bound that it produces music. And it produces music in harmony with all the other strings, with the wah, the CITES, CBD, etc. Okay? So the IPPC is one of these strings that produces rules that instill harmony in trade and protect biodiversity, plant health, agriculture. So that's our mission, to produce harmony. Now, going back to climate, so climate pressures, climate change were one of our priorities, and what we've done is we've made that a base, because in our space, for me at least, climate doesn't really change much in the rules. It doesn't really, we're still science-based. Climate change, climate pressures are adding a level of pressure, if you wish. So we've seen amplifications of pests. For example, fall armyworm occurred in Australia. Tell me if I'm speaking too much, right?
I certainly will.
Good. So we used to be responsible for risk assessment in New Zealand, and we were tackling the problem of fall armyworm. New Zealand didn't have fall armyworm. And we found it in Australia, Queensland. And we did our risk assessment, and we noticed that with cyclones, we can't do much to stop it, because this pest balloons, and it can emigrate for thousands of kilometers by ballooning like a kite. So we noticed that it wasn't going to, we couldn't do much, we can't eradicate it. And that was our risk assessment. We said we can't eradicate it, and it probably will arrive between 6 months and 5 years. And it arrived 1 year afterwards. So that's the problem with climate change. It's just a new card we need to take into account when we're doing our risk assessments, when we're implementing our standards.
But,
I hope that answers the question.
But there is then a link with these talks on trade, on climate. There are frameworks within which certain rules can then apply more specifically to seed or plants, plant material. But I do want to try and understand a bit still the geopolitical dimension here, and maybe I can actually turn to Henrique on just to take a very specific example, like Brazil, right? So you're operating in Brazil, major agricultural country. So to bring it back a little bit more to agriculture and politics. So we've seen in Brazil big changes in the last 10 years in political color, let's say. And I suppose that is then influencing international negotiations on climate, on trade, because obviously Brazil is a big country, a big stakeholder in those negotiations. So on the agriculture side, whether governments go in one direction or another in Brazil, have you, for instance, seen any specific difference when it comes to the policies that are impacting your area, seed and agriculture in Brazil? Does it make any difference at all?
Okay. No, thank you for ISF for the invitation, and thank you for being here. I can be more longer your period, not just 10 years, okay? More specific, when you saw the last 40 years, Brazil goes through import food country. Then today we produce food for 1.2 billion of people in the world. Okay, and what happened in Brazil? As you said, we have many political chains, right, left, but the main point is about frameworks, legal frameworks. First one was economic. In '94, we have economic change that make previsibility in our currency, in our economy. Our Plant Protection Act, it's from 97. Our IP Lloyd's 972. Our biotechnology law is from starting 98 and goes to be real in 2005. With that, the companies have a more stable world to invest. That makes sense for companies invest in Brazil and just transform our agriculture, okay? Brazil have today many companies from Brazil, from outside Brazil, that's run a lot of activities there, just not for seeds, but for crop protection, for machinery, to harvest, to plant seeds, to process, and package seeds too, package grains, package everything, and to export. And for company like GDM, it's very important. And linking again with phytosanitary points, it's as a breeding company, we move a lot of seeds around the world. We operate in US, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, China. Once we want breed, we want to breeding varieties from US with Brazil, but how we can go together these materials? Then we need import. As example, a good example, Argentina and US have a recognition about phytosanitary proceedings, and this take 10 days to move seeds from US and Argentina and vice versa. When you go to Brazil, take 50 to 60 days to move seeds. This makes a lot of difference to us. This means 1 season, 2 seasons, 1 year, 2 years to get a new material, a new variety to go to the farmer. And to the farmer, and at the end of the day, they need a good material to more yield stability, or more tasty, more shelf life on the products that they want. And for that, it's too important is a lot of things that we are talking about here, the previsibility, the laws, the regulations, and how we can operate on that, exploring the maximum as a company.
So I understand that the international frameworks are also a kind of a buffer to some extent, and regardless in a way of political developments in a country, countries are still bound by international frameworks. So in a way, it limits the amount of changes that can occur for the sector. On the other hand, if we take the COP, the climate talks, for instance, we're in something that is not yet so binding as an international framework. So there's a little bit more room for maneuver. Mm-hmm. And to come back to you, Lloyd, I mean, you've been part of you've been taking an active role in the last four COPs, right? So you've really been out there to try and organize a big pavilion, bringing agriculture to these talks and the role of agriculture. How much do you consider that seeds in particular are understood by negotiators in climate talks as a potential kind of ally for them? Or would they tend to think that actually, I don't know, the seed industry is actually maybe a foe, something they would actually have to fight against in their fight for climate change? What's the temperature in the room over there?
Well, I don't think they're even thinking about seeds. When people think about agriculture, they're really thinking about crops, or they're thinking about livestock. And that's one of the things we want to change. We want people to think about seeds and understand that everything starts with a seed. And that's one of the reasons that I've come to the last two World Seed Congresses, is because I think we need to think about seed as the mechanism of delivery for innovation. And it's that innovation that is going to address the concerns of these climate talks. We started going to the climate conventions in a big way in the last 4 years. We've been going there with member states for many years to help our agricultural ministries try to have a seat at the table and try to talk, at least in the negotiations, about agriculture. But we thought we needed to get a little bit bigger and to make a statement. And thanks to support from those in the private sector around the world, I see one of them here, Ronald Gendel, who's used to be from Bayer. He's playing on his phone right now, and that's the problem of having, the iPhone. Nobody listens to anything anymore, but at least I can pick on him because he's doing that. We got the ag sector, the global ag sector, to come to our pavilion, the home of sustainable agriculture, the Americas. And the Americas is the breadbasket of the world. We're responsible for 1/3 of the exports that are in those ships that you see around the world. And we thought it very important that we have a voice in these talks that say, first, that farmers need to be listened to. Farmers aren't listened to. Seed farmers, the least of all, but farmers aren't listened to. And so they need to be a part of this conversation. When people are bashing agriculture and making policies, they need to remember the people that are actually working 24/7, that don't get Christmas off if they're milking a cow. Cows don't take off for Christmas or their birthday or anything else. They need to be milked. They're working nonstop, so farmers need to be a part of this discussion. Science needs to be the foundation for public policy. It's not. It needs to be, and that's why the three sisters, as they're called, or the brothers, IPPC, WO, and Codex, are so important. And then finally, we need to look at agriculture instead of as a problem, which I think they look at in the climate discussions. Agriculture is a contaminator. They're a problem. They're big business. It's not a problem. It's a solution. But that solution begins with the seed. So we've been talking a lot in these COPs about soil and about water, but it's important to talk about seed because the innovation that's going to occur in that seed is going to transform the world, and it's going to address many of the climate problems that we have. So I would like to see the seed sector more active. I'd like to see ISF there in a big way. There's a lot of challenges when it comes to the COPs these days because some of my member states have withdrawn completely from those organizations, and so we're going to have to rethink how we are active with our other member states in a way that supports them without alienating the other member states. And so that's going to be a challenge. But the bottom line is that our sector, from seeds to the end product to the food, needs to be at these discussions and needs to promote the fact that we are part of the solution, that we're vital for humanity, we're vital for life, and again, it all starts with a seed.
So I think no one would sort of disagree with the idea that we need to be more sustainable as a society in general in the way we consume and produce. But on the other hand, having said that, everything is extremely antagonistic behind that statement because there will be many, many different visions as to how to achieve that sustainability, that theoretical idea of what sustainability is. Now, when you're in an organization like the IPPC and you have a very technical framework, and you're seeing these discussions happening in COP, and there are very direct links because you're observing how pests are moving, are developing, are you able to somehow shape that sustainability narrative, or do you feel that it is shaping you in what you do, and you are having to transform your tools also due to some of the outcomes that are coming from climate negotiations more than actually real effects on the ground in the fields?
So our mission is to protect plant health, but plant health includes biodiversity. And funnily enough, I'm the chair of the Biodiversity Liaison Group, which encompasses many of the COP members, the societies, CBD, etc., Ramsar. So we are trying to work together to align. So that's one point. But seeds is part of the process, and I think I agree. People see the big picture at that level, and seed's the beginning. Seed is life. It's the beginning of life. And seed is also part of those pathways that can bring disease and problems in health. So we do need to regulate seed in the best way possible to protect our planet, but also to enable trade. And that's what we're trying to do. So we've got these standards like the International Standard for Phytosanitary Measure 38, for example, which regulates seed trade. But we're also developing other standards. So we're thinking now of developing the standard for humanitarian aid, because humanitarian aid is the transport of seeds to countries too. When we've got 92% probability of El Nino this year, there's going to be a need for transfer of seeds for farmers that are going to be suffering from weather conditions, etc. In the South Americas, South America will be impacted. Africa is already been impacted. We've seen floods, etc. And I'm not speaking about conflicts. Just nature, climate is already affecting our system. So we're trying to work together, A, to be efficient, B, to put in place processes that protect health throughout the world, but also focus on people, because we are to serve people at the end of the day. So that's one dimension. The other dimension, you were speaking about binding. The International Plant Protection Convention is binding. The Canning, Montreal, a lot of these COP, they're not really binding. They're frameworks, which creates less pressure. But the Canning, Montreal Agreement, I think signed in 2022 by 196 parties, encompasses Target 6, which aims at diminishing by 50% by 2030 the incidence of new invasive species and pests coming into countries. So there's a significant alignment with our standards and the COP parties. We need to work together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so Lloyd, you made the plea that the private sector needs to be more engaged in shaping this conversation. I would take it then to Enrique to sort of comment a little bit on that. I mean, do you think the private sector is doing enough to try and shape these conversations in the COP, for instance? But also on the other hand, do you think that some of the public institutions that are working on these sort of agricultural seed-related issues on a technical level, are they also, in a way, doing enough, in your view, to also shape their colleagues' views on what sustainability policies should look like and how it should impact the seed sector?
Okay, let's be on part. From GDM side, we truly believe that, as you said, everything starts on the seeds. And for us, that's very true, because we are essentially a breeding company, okay? Then for us, we cannot imagine a better goal than produce more yield or stability at the same area with the same inputs, okay? This is our main goal, bring yield gain year by year in our varieties or hybrids, in our materials that we produce. Linking on that, the private sector in Brazil today, they play the main role about seeds, okay? The main markets just for field crops or veggies are occupied by the private sector. They play this role, the important role. And if you saw our agriculture, you see, we produce in 2 seasons. And when you talk about sustainability, we need thinking about the farmer. What is sustainability for the farmer? The best asset that the farmer has is the land. How they can maximize the land with 2 seasons. Then they have the best seed, short varieties, short season varieties to produce a second season or a cover season, a cover crop for that in the south to maximize the income at the end of the seasons. When you go to the public sector, Embrapa plays an important role in Brazil. You have another institution like IICA in São Paulo, and every state have one agency too. But Embrapa in the past played an important role, for example, to bring soybean to Brazil, start breeding, and make possible the soybeans and corn in Cerrado, a new management techniques for Cerrado, because Cerrado have poor soils and acid soils that cannot be agriculture in the past. They played this role in the past, but today they need to concentrate in other crops or other kind of projects, for example, for sustainability, how we can manage new techniques such as agriculture, forest together, okay, in the same area, for example, to compensate gas emission, everything about that. I think the public sector play important roles, yes.
But this idea of, basically productivity, yield, as being, the way of making agriculture sustainable, I'm not sure that's always shared. I mean, if you take your area, Lloyd, I mean, I'm not sure that is a common vision. Surely there will be contrasting views that sustainability in agriculture is not just about yield, right? And I think that you're also seeing tensions within your region on what sort of trajectory to take in terms of sustainability, and whether even sustainability is a goal in itself for agriculture. I mean, I'm sure you're having to manage these tensions and these diverging views.
Yeah.
So how do you manage that?
Well, it's a challenge, obviously. I think the notion of taking care of soil and of water and of not contaminating from agriculture has really grown in recent years. And I think everyone here has heard of regenerative agriculture. I don't think anybody was talking about regenerative agriculture 10 years ago. But now everyone does. All the big companies talk about regenerative agriculture. And so that's progress. That's progress where people are using new techniques to take care of the soil, to take care of the land, to plant trees, and all the benefits that come from the diversity and biodiversity on a farm and in a region. And so I think there's new things that farmers and government entities and private sector, we're all learning together how to do a better job. And from that, we're actually learning how to produce even better, even smarter, using different type of biological inputs. I went to a really good presentation here about biologicals by one of the companies that talked about how this is the future. Now others will say it's not the future. We still need synthetic chemicals and to protect us from all these weeds and pests and diseases, and that's true. But science is evolving, and we're learning new things all the time, and that's why we think it's very important that governments and that companies invest in research. And research has done wonderful things. Enrico talked about the Cerrado in Brazil. Brazil transformed unproductive land into some of the most productive land in the world, and they're feeding 4 times their population now around the world thanks to science and better treatment of the soils. And you know, Brazil gets beat up all the time by people from your part of the world, sorry, Jean-Paul, saying you can't do this or you must not do that. Brazil is feeding the world. The other part of the world isn't. So they need to be given some credit and some resources and some support to do that rather than just new regulations that are not based on science.
So on this research point, Enrico, maybe, how much does IPPC invest in research, actually, in itself? I mean, what are we talking in terms of scale and process?
So when you say IPPC, don't forget it's a contract between 185 countries. Mm-hmm. So those countries do invest a lot. So in your part of the world, Fresco, Europe invests, Australia, New Zealand, the South America, Embrapa, we were speaking about Embrapa. A lot of our signatories invest a lot in research. Now, at the end, those 185 countries and signatories represent you. So that's that. We're all in it together. So it's not only government that needs to do research. It's not only industry that need to take this. It's all of us. We're all stewards of this planet, I think, and that's the key message, really. So how do we do it better? But the FAO has just appointed a chief scientist, Charles Spillan from Ireland, and he's going to be giving us direction in research. How do we catalyze all the information? How do we amplify it with our role in the Food and Agriculture Organization? And in the IPPC space, we're aiming to do the same. How do we make tangible outcomes? Because we're science-based. We're not emotional. Well, we try not to be. Sometimes I can be emotional, but we science-based. If you've got the data, if you can prove it, then demonstrate, and we'll take that in account. And I think that's key, because when we speak about politics, when we speak about a lot of these sustainability questions, there's a lot of emotion. But at the end, the data, as you were saying, like no-tilling, planting on it comes in, I forget how you say, the wheat, doesn't matter, des plates-bandes in French. There's been significant breakthroughs in saving the soils. And now, as you said, Lloyd, we've heard a lot of other breakthroughs in this conference here that can push that further. So we're based on data. If the data's there, that will influence the way we create our standards. And the key thing is then to implement the standards, but that's for another time.
Well, I mean, maybe on that, because you were saying we try not to be emotional. On the other hand, I think these days, politically, it's quite difficult to stand on a platform and say, we need to rely on global partners for our country. I mean, the trend is much more, we need to rely on ourselves with our own assets and build our sovereignty in opposition, in a way, to this idea of dependence on others. I mean, I'm throwing this at you. You might disagree, but I would say this is beginning to color also the way governments are interacting with some of the international frameworks.
Yes.
And so this idea of protectionism and relying less on others, and in the end, trade as well, is putting a lot of pressure, I think, on global supply chains. But in the area of plant health, which we know is highly connected to trade, because it is potentially a barrier to trade, and that's where your standards come in to try and avoid that it is a barrier. But do you see increasing pressure on national plant protection offices to be a little bit more, let's say, or less risk-averse, to basically heighten the barriers because it reflects a bit of a political direction that is given by governments? Do you see this trend within the IPPC?
So as a biologist, my take is when there's insecurity, you lock your door. If there's news in your suburb that there's more thefts, etc., you're going to ensure that your door's locked. In the good old days, we didn't lock our doors, people will say. So there's this feeling of insecurity. And my view, my emotional view now, is that without rules and implementation of these rules, there's chaos. Having lived in different countries where rules weren't applied, there's significant chaos. And with chaos, there's a lack of predictability, there's a lack of consistency, and frankly, we can't invest in chaos because you never know if you'll have a return. So I've got a lot of faith, yeah. I think the standards are helping us mitigate this chaos. And they're not the best. There's people that are bypassing them. There's some governments are using non-tariff measures to influence trade. Some parties are dodging the bullets, you know. But at the end, it's still the best system, I think. And even if the protectionism is going up because of insecurity, it's not the answer. Because we are gregarious, and we're all stronger together. A cord of three strands is stronger than one.
But do you have tools to sort of push implementation when you see it's clearly not happening? Do you have a bit of stick?
Stick. Well, that's the problem. If you don't apply a law and don't enforce it, it doesn't have much value. I think you're right. So we don't have much stick, I must say, in the IPPC space. But I'm thinking about some sticks. Because at the end, let me give another quick metaphor. When I was working in Australia, we implemented the risk-return approach, where it's about risk. Those that protect their plants, those that are good and clean and meet the standards, were rewarded, and there was less inspections, less pressure on them. They got rewarded. While those that didn't meet the standards, there was enhanced inspection. That's a simple way of just saving money. And at the end, there was a change in culture in the importers. Because before, everybody was inspected and treated the same. It wasn't risk-based. Now we're aiming to be risk-based. So I think that's one of the incentives that we're thinking of maybe implementing risk-based systems.
Okay. Enrique, maybe a counterexample to what I was saying on protectionism and trade barriers is actually the recent agreement between the EU and Mercosur. I mean, that offers another take on global politics. Let's say it took a long time to come into the making, but it's there. It's obviously very high level bilateral agreement between the EU and Mercosur. But do you think this can have an impact, a positive impact on the seed industry, or do you actually see within that trade agreement elements that you actually will find more difficult coming out of it?
Actually, we have a lot of expectation on that, okay? Because we have many time to get this deal, but it's done now. One of this, I think, in our side, thinking in the agreement, the 4 countries and Latin America and South America in general, for example, we are leading how we are implementing new technology, for example, the NGTs, new genomic techniques. Argentina have the first law for that, first regulation from 2015, Brazil 2018, Paraguay is the same, Uruguay is the same, and how the Mercosur can help European Union on the discussions on the new regulation. We know that they are almost there to signing. The Parliament will be signing probably in the next month. We pray for that. But after that, for the implementation, how they can learn with us, 10 years we are doing that, how they can learn, and for the implementation side, to be more simple, respecting all the decisions that they already done for that, okay, NGT1, NGT2, this is one part. And the other part, it's how we can implement the phyto in a more broadly way. Brazil used that. It's fantastic for us because it's a lot less bureaucracy. And how the 27 countries from the European Union can do that in a fast way. Because today, some countries adopt, others not. how can do that in a block? I think it's a good point for that.
I'd like Enrico to come back on the e-fighter point. Maybe I can just go to Lloyd on the more tech part of your answer, because that is another aspect of this sort of protectionism versus globalization argument, let's say. So where are the solutions coming from? Should we rely on our own solutions developed in our own country, or can we rely on solutions coming from other countries, companies in other countries? And so in your organization, you're very much, promoting this sort of regional cooperation and having technology solutions available. But are you seeing pushback against that, and countries trying to develop, in a way, their own technology for their own, markets?
Well, it's a good question, and I agree with your premise that the world is kind of trending that way, which is probably unfortunate, but I think through structures like the IPPC and their brothers, we can maybe put them back on track. Everyone wants technology to be, developed in their own borders, by their own companies, by their own individuals, but it's a global marketplace. And so technology comes from everywhere, and what we really need is a common framework for analyzing those technologies and hopefully embracing those technologies so that they can get to the market and benefit everyone everywhere. And we've been able to do that. 8 years ago, we had a meeting of regulators in Cali, Colombia at CIET, and we really were taking the Argentine and Brazilian framework for analyzing and approving these new plant breeding technologies, gene editing, where if there's no foreign DNA, that it's a conventional, plant. You're just turning off or turning on a gene that exists in the plant. And that became, through years of work by our organization and others, pretty much commonplace in all the Americas. Just about all the countries you saw from other presentations here, the map was green for the Americas, except for one, a couple big gaps. But we're working on those, and hopefully they'll come together. And we just came off a conference in Medellin, the same group of regulators from all those countries, and the esprit de corps of those regulators, that they're all kind of aligned, not necessarily harmonized, in order to bring new technology to the marketplace, was really, I'd say, rewarding. And I'm optimistic about even those countries that haven't, embraced that. Their regulators were there, and they want to do the right thing. Now it's going to take some political courage, and that political courage will eventually come, especially as their competitors start taking advantage of that. And so I'm optimistic that we can align regulators to do the right thing, and then through investment, through education, there's good technology occurring everywhere. And with AI and with CRISPR and with gene editing, it doesn't take, a huge multinational company. It helps, but smaller companies are starting to do stuff. And we had some of those companies with us for days after the regulators discussed, and they're finding a solution to HLB, citrus greening, which is devastating. We're almost there. We're going to find, hopefully, a solution to Fusarium race 4 in bananas, to browning in bananas. We're going to solve porcine respiratory syndrome that affects 2 billion to 4 billion in the pork industry, and like that in other different parts of the food supply chain. And so it's happening, and every country is going to look at their own crop and their own needs, and scientists, young and old, are going to figure out a solution to that. So I came out of that very optimistic.
I can see.
And it's mostly about a seed. It's not bananas. We're going to work on bananas, but we're going to solve a lot of problems.
And also what you're saying is that your regional cooperation framework has helped to, get that level of harmonized understanding as to what the right policies should be. To come back maybe to e-fighter, because that was the other part of the answer as well from Enrique. Enrico then, how do you see this sort of combination of digital tool with something that can create more harmonization? I mean, is that something that you're really pushing, that is developing? Can you just give us a comment on where you're at with e-phyto?
We are pushing. I mean, if you traveled here, you saw everything's becoming biometrical with your passports. So e-phyto is the same. It's a sort of a passport for consignments, for plants. In the old days, it was a paper with ad declarations, and there were issues because ships could be stopped for hours, days, and that costs a fortune. It's $40,000 per day, I think, in some ports, even more, just waiting for the passport to be stamped. Now more than 100 countries are using e-phyto, which is an electronic phytosanitary certificate, an electronic passport for plant products and plants. And that's really streamlining. It's bypassing issues of corruption. It's accelerating transactions. And it's really a no-brainer, I should say. Not all countries are using them. Not all of 185 shareholders are using them. But that's my mission in the next 3 years, for everybody to use it. And not use the dual system.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue when there's duality. Let's embrace technology. When it works, let's use it. And this has been piloted for years, and now we know it works. So I think that's a typical example of progress using new technology, electronic technologies. When you've defined the problem, when we've framed the problem very well, then there's solutions. And I think sometimes it's asking the right questions, which is the problem, even with sustainability. Because there's so many questions. What is the real problem definition we're trying to solve here? But e-phyto is one of the solutions for trade. Very good one.
That's my nightmare question every morning when I wake up. Am I asking the right questions? Maybe over to you then to try and ask some questions. If you have anything, it can be a comment on anything that you've heard, or a very specific question. I think they can all handle also very specific technical questions. So I turn to you. If in the floor there are any thoughts, questions, comments, provocations, we can take anything.
Criticisms.
Criticism, it can be as well. Maybe some of you struggle with some of the tools that have been rather positively expressed here. Yes? No? Question? Comment? Not particularly? Okay, I'll give you an extra moment to think about that. I would also like maybe to come back to this question of international frameworks, because we know that seed relies a lot on movement at every stage. So it's not even the last part, it's within research, breeding programs, seed production, multiplication. At every stage, there is a need to move seed around the world. I'm just wondering, when you look at it from the seed industry perspective, do you think you have all the international frameworks in place that allow you to do that? Or do you think there are international frameworks that are missing? And if so, which could those be? It's a bit of a, open creative question, if you like. But I wonder if there's anything that you think is missing, and what could it be?
I think today, for us, it's not missing, but it's about implementation. Yeah. As I said, the first example, when we are moving seeds from US, from Brazil to Brazil or Argentina, it's so fast. 10 days, it's so fast. Okay, we know that for research. But when we go to Brazil, it takes 50 to 60 days, and we know that, for example, now our Ministry of Agriculture is taking a pilot project with Chile to get this agreement. Okay. Then they are starting with Chile, but it's a country-by-country protocol. We start with Chile, with corn. Then we move probably for another countries. It's our desire. But we need more investment on this, okay? Agencies, implementations. And how we can be more fast in a safety way, okay, in phytosanitary way. Must be country by country, or can be blocked like Mercosur, European Union. How we can do that to be more fast on these movements. And must be crop by crop, I don't know. The technical point can be solved that, but we need that to be more fast to deliver best seeds to the farmers, okay? Because we have a big challenge for next 10, 30, 20, 50 years to get food for another billion of people, okay? Then we must think on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Enrico, maybe a comment, because that's going a little bit in your direction. Maybe things are not happening fast enough. And do you think that, because you have the 100 and how many countries again?
85.
185. Do you think there would be a benefit for some of those countries to group together more within that?
Yes, and we are already doing that. So we've got the Standards Committee and the Standards Committee 7, which are currently meeting in Rome. And so that kind of accelerates the discussions, because they kind of represent the regions. So we've got representatives of all the regions of the world involved in those discussions. So they should represent IICA and all the regions. Okay, so that's one point. So there's systems already in place. Of course, we can do better. Nothing's perfect. So that's why we're reviewing standards. And then implementation's key. So IPPC Secretariat and the IPPC is developing all these tools to help implement. So we've got tools like an audit tool, if you wish, or I shouldn't say audit, an evaluation tool, the phytosanitary capacity evaluation, which enables countries to self-assess themselves and see what are the gaps. We've got also just a virtual university, the campus, which is there to train the future biosecurity officers and future government workers. So that's not slowed down. But more importantly, what we're trying to do now in the seed space and in the global space is a new standard, or series of standards, international standard for phytosanitary measures 47, which are commodity standards. So if the countries have agreed to these commodity standards, then it should fast-track trade, because the framework, the paradigm's already there, the pests already there. So this will assist negotiation, and I think that's going to be a good way. We've already got the mango fruit commodity standard, but we are working on the bean seed commodity standard, and that will be a bit of a pilot. If it works well, if people use these standards, well, then we'll amplify it. We can have another commodity, etc. So I think there's a lot of optimism, at least where I stand.
Okay. And on your side, Lloyd, I mean, maybe just a curiosity, because you're representing then an organization across all the Americas. Do you have similar governmental organizations focused on agriculture across regions in other parts of the world? I mean, is that like a pattern? And again, I'd like to just get you to think about potentially a missing international framework of some sort that could help facilitate more movement of seed.
We don't have an IICA in other regions of the world, and that, I think it would be useful for certain parts. I mean, there are organizations in Africa, Europe, etc., that do bring governments together, but not necessarily just on agriculture, and we think that would be useful. We do have sub-regional groups like the Central American Ministers of Agriculture, the Andean Ministers of Agriculture, the CARICOM for the Caribbean, the NAFTA countries for North America, and the Consejo Agropecuario del Sur for South America that do work on these issues together as regions, and they try to work on these SPS issues. These SPS issues are difficult because those authorities, their job is to protect their farmers in their country from anything invasive or foreign that could damage their economic health. So they have a job. But the work of IPPC and its two sisters, in order to establish the binding guidelines and frameworks and rules, is vital. And those can then be utilized in the WTO, which we heard about from Edwini in the opening session. Needs to change. It needs to change in order to make it more effective. But once that can happen, and hopefully with all the noise in the system that you alluded to earlier, that will help force some change to reform those institutions so that they'll become more effective. And then hopefully with that, we'll have freer trade and fairer trade. And with that, hopefully the seeds will be a component of that. It will be based on standards that will be global. And we can get Enrique's seeds to areas of, need in our region. We always need seeds when there's a weather event somewhere. So I'm going to be calling him now that I have his business card to say, hey, I need some seeds for, a certain island or something like that got wiped out by a hurricane. And sometimes, ironically, there's huge demand and need after some kind of event, and those seeds can't arrive because of some kind of rule that the NPPO has in those countries that won't allow a transgenic seed or a gene-edited seed or something like that.
But there is the humanitarian aid.
Yes, that's a standard we're working on because of this need. So at least when there's a framework, a standard, hopefully it'll facilitate the passage of seeds and the trade of these seeds, because these are emergencies. You can't leave people behind.
Yeah. Do we have, please, can we, and please briefly introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Art Rallesdam. I'm working for Solinta, but I'm also chair of the IICA Phyto Committee. And having good standards is very important, and we really enjoy having these standards also for seeds. Having a stick for implementation, you don't have that tool. But on the other side of the spectrum, it's about training and knowledge and having resources for implementation. What do you do to make sure that countries also have the right capacity, knowledge, but also capacity?
That's for me.
Yeah.
So we've got a whole team that implements the implementation and capacity building team, I should say. So they focus on implementing the standards, and that's capacity building. So one great effort that we're doing is the African phytosanitary program, as an example, where we're working with African countries to train them so that they can respond to some of your questions and be informed on the decisions, but also to train the future generations, as I was saying, with the campus. We try to make everybody aware of the standards and how to implement them. And we've got guidelines. It's all open source. You can read it on the IPPC webpage.
Okay, we have maybe time for just one more, if there is a question. Yep, please, if we can hand a microphone over here, and then briefly introduce yourself. The microphone is coming.
Hello.
It'll be on, yeah.
Hi, my name is Sean. I represent a Taiwanese company, NONUC. So, for the record, I'm not trying to challenge the mainstream ideas of moving in the industry toward sustainability agriculture. I do believe sustainability agriculture is ideal, but the vast majority of a low and the middle class incomes consumers cannot, they don't care about anything more than the price. Unless governments introduce some kinds of subsidies encourage sustainable agricultures, implementations remains very challenging. Especially from my point of view, I travel quite a lot in Southeast Asia. In developing countries, that can be very challenging. Therefore, I would like to ask the speaker, how can companies balance the pursuit of sustainability agriculture, which may inadvertently increase our profitable costs, production costs, with the needs to ensure stability, profitability effect ensures for the corporate survival. Well, since how can we serve more of a majority of the consumer, not just a portion, like the top of the portions.
Okay, so maybe one for Enrique. Can you do this while keeping affordability, let's say, for the end consumer to some extent?
Yeah, no, it's hard work. I think you are right at some point. In our case, we work with commodities, okay? Then commodities about demand and supply. In the pandemic situation, for example, the cost of the soybean was 200 almost, and now it's like 8. a bag in Brazil. It's double the size in pandemic situation because every country in the world run to buy soybean or corn to establish some supply for security, for food security. And today, the price goes down. The way that we see that to consumer and the government play an important role in that. For many countries have security supply, okay? They can, for lower class, they can't supply that. This happens in Brazil, for example, for small farmers and for low-income people. They have programs for that, but for day by day, for the consumer in the market, it's hard. Yes, I agree with you.
And so one shouldn't lose track also of the end price in all of this, and all the inputs obviously play a role there. We have to close this conversation, so I would like to thank our three panelists for having shared all of your insight on the state of the world and everything that you're doing to try and avoid that in the end seed somewhere is blocked, like our ships in the Strait of Hormuz currently. And good luck in implementing some of the measures that you have in mind, because all of them will be very useful for the future of agriculture. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.